Now, Chitra Nagarajan is a journalist and a writer who writes on climate change, conflict, feminism, foreign policy, migration, Nigeria and the wider Lake Chad region, race and sexual orientation, gender identity and gender expression, just in case you were wondering. She writes on almost everything. Well, she's written for The Guardian, The New Humanist, The New Internationalist, This is Africa and Ventures Africa. She's also appeared on Sky News and the BBC World Service. Chitra co-edited She Called Me Woman, Nigeria's Queer Women Speak, a book on narratives published by Cassava Republic Press. She was born in Maiduguri in Borno State, Nigeria right here, and splits her time between Berlin over in Germany and West and Central Africa. She joins us now to rub minds on a few salient issues in tune with the times we live in. Good morning, Chitra. Welcome to the morning show. It is a pleasure to have you here. First and foremost, we do want to say a huge congratulations for putting together your book. The world was in our hands. Kachi has it in her hands, quite literally. and I know that our colleague Adesu is also keen to join in on this conversation. Firstly, let's talk about your book that we've come here to discuss. It is clearly, as we said in the introduction, a salient point that you're hammering home. Talk to us firstly about your decision to write that book and what your greatest challenge was in putting it together.
Yes, thank you so much, Femi. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. So I decided to write The World Was in Our Hands while I was living and working in Maiduguri. And at the same time, I would be traveling to Abuja, Lagos, and other parts of Nigeria, and I saw such a disconnect between what I was experiencing in Northeast Nigeria and some of the people I was working with and their stories, and what the rest of the country knew about what was happening in Northeast Nigeria and the Lake Chad Basin region. And at the same time, as I was living in Maiduguri, I was traveling around also to Chad, Cameroon, Niger as well. And I really felt a responsibility to document what was happening in the Boko Haram conflict, not just for us living here today, but also for future generations, because we know that history tends to be from the perspectives of the elites and elite men in particular. And yet at the same time, there was such a wealth of information of what was happening. So, for example, women who were hiding men in their houses to prevent them from being killed by Boko Haram, smuggling them across the border to Cameroon to safety, civil servants who were experiencing the impact of the conflict on their families and also their livelihoods, fishermen who were being attacked on the lake, Lake Chad, and so many other stories as well. And I really wanted to document that so Nigerians knew what was happening in our own country, and also that future generations would know what their ancestors went through.
I mean, thank you for laying that very, very crucial foundation, because like you rightly said, oftentimes history is subjective, especially in how it is delivered. I was just telling you that with regards to this book, one of the things I love about it is because whenever we want to know what has really happened, it is important to hear from all sides. And this gives us perspective into victims, gives us perspective into those on the battlefield. Now, one of the things I found most heartbreaking is whenever we talk about the insurgency, Boko Haram in Nigeria specifically, we always talk about how we do not have enough hands fighting this battle, how it's lapses on the security agencies and their effort to do this. But I know that there are soldiers who have died. I'm not even sure if they were giving a proper burial, but I know that they have died in their fight for Nigeria against insurgency. Based on your reflections, you said you've spoken to about now 900 different people. What would you say about those men that were in these areas as well? Who were they? What were they like? What was their fight like? How do they feel about the difficulty in handling insurgency? And how do you think they would feel knowing that even till today, it's still a major problem in Nigeria?
I feel like the conversation that we have about security forces in Nigeria is very incomplete, actually, because there's a tendency either to talk about them as our brave heroes defending Nigeria, or talk about them in terms of people who commit human rights violations. And of course, both of those narratives are true. But in terms of what soldiers themselves go through, I think that's really missing from the public discourse. I spent years in Borno State engaging with soldiers. While I was living there, one of the things I was doing was giving them training on human rights, humanitarian law, civilian protection, and how to reduce the harm to civilians during their operations. And I really gained an insight into what they go through. Many of them have been posted in northeast Nigeria, not just for months, but for years. So imagine living in the heat of conflict for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, with very few breaks to come and see your families. In fact, many of them, their relationship with their family has really been affected. They don't know their kids, their wives. They are not able to keep in regular contact with them. Also because often they're fighting in areas without network also, so they can't even make simple phone calls. They're under attack. Because it's the people that they're fighting are not wearing uniforms, it's very difficult to distinguish between who is an enemy and who is a civilian. So they see everybody as a threat. They see their comrades being killed right next to them. The level of battle trauma that they suffer is really immense. Many of them are experiencing really grave mental health issues. I can't even call it post-traumatic stress disorder because they're still in the trauma. And there's a lot more that I feel that the Nigerian government should do in terms of giving soldiers proper breaks, giving them proper pay and benefits, proper equipment, materials, but also really putting in place proper mental health support programs as well.
Adisola, do you want to come in here?
Definitely, Chitra. Yes, thank you so much, Adefemi. Now, it's really great to have you on the show. I've got a chance to look at your book, and I think it's really giving a human face to the cost of this crisis of insecurity that we're facing in Nigeria. And I know for a lot of viewers, what seemed so foreign before, the idea of Boko Haram and terrorism, has come closer and closer to home as we now experience kidnappings and banditry and even more crises. Just last week, I saw another splinter group of Boko Haram receive a new name in, I believe, the North Central or Nasarawa State region. So I want to ask you specifically, because you spoke about soldier welfare. If we're thinking about soldier welfare and the food they get and the health care that they're given, do you think our soldiers, our military in Nigeria are adequately supported? And beyond that also, you're giving a human face to the cost of conflict. What for you stood out as a characteristic or something that changed or something that really was important to people who survive these type of conflicts and terror? Because for a lot of these communities, they're still undergoing that same terror today.
So apologies there for that little distraction. Unfortunately, Chitra couldn't quite hear you. So if you could just go over your question again. Now she can hear you because we had to get her set up. So if it's okay, could you just give her the question again? Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. So I was just saying that the book really tries to show a human face on the cost of conflict. I wanted to ask Chitra what really stands out to her as a characteristic of the cost of conflict on human beings and communities in Nigeria, primarily because a lot of these communities are still facing terror today with these new Boko Haram splinter groups and a resurgence of activity in the last couple of years.
I always say that to some extent, everybody in northeast Nigeria, and unfortunately by this point, the conflict is not just limited to the northeast Nigeria, but we see also violence in many parts of northern Nigeria. And in every place where you see conflict and violence, I would actually say that everyone is to some extent a victim of what has happened. You see impacts on healthcare facilities, schools. You see impact on livelihoods as well. And that's just what the whole population is suffering, let alone people who experience direct violence people who've seen their parents killed right in front of them, who've seen their children abducted, women who have been taken and have been forced into marriage and raped, men who have been killed and targeted for that. So you really see the way that everybody has experienced violence. And as you said, I think one of the biggest issues is the violence is not over. The Boko Haram conflict may no longer really make the headlines in Nigeria in the same way that it did 10 years ago, but that doesn't mean that people do not continue to suffer. And at the same time, there's a lack of help in terms of trauma healing and helping people to move on. And again, we see people who've tried to rebuild their lives, who have found a place to farm, who have tried to plant and get crops, and then something happens like the rains or the floods. And even if it's been 2 or 3 years that they've been managing to survive, all of that work just overnight goes back to zero. So I think there's a lot more that we really need to be doing to support people go through the conflict and move on. Because if you're living in a situation where you're fearing attacks, if you're living in a situation where you are not back home, and if you're living in a situation where you're not able to provide for yourself and your family, it's very difficult to move on from the conflict. But at the same time, I would say that people are really trying. People are supporting themselves, supporting their families, and supporting each other. And we can see that people, if security is there and livelihoods are there, people are able to move on. And I would also say that having worked in Northeast Nigeria now for 12 years, I think conflict always shows both the worst but also the best in humanity. Yeah.
No, I think that's incredibly apt, Chitra. Thank you very much. And thank you for being able to deliver such a wonderful answer despite the challenges that we've been having in the studio. Mm-hmm. I do want to speak to you also about gender dynamics here. I know that this is something that you write about extensively, but I guess if we're looking against the backdrop of this conflict, right, and we already know that there's so many power imbalances between people who are armed and not armed, people who can say something, people who cannot. I wonder what you can tell us about the role of gender at all, what experiences you were privy to in putting together this book.
Thank you. So I would talk about gender in 3 ways. The first is looking at the roles people play in the conflict. And so here we see, I mean, not to stereotype, but actually we see, largely speaking, most of the combatants tend to be men, definitely on the Nigerian military side, but also in terms of fighting on the Boko Haram side. Saying that, however, women play really important roles in driving conflict, but also driving peace. And so the roles that women play within Boko Haram are also really important. So they have been recruiters, there have been people who've supported the group. And then also in the community militia groups, such as the Civilian Joint Task Force, you see women playing really important roles as well. So even though it's true that the vast majority of people fighting are men, I think it's also important to see the roles that women play in the conflict as well. We know that the conflict has had impacts that are profoundly gendered. And here we tend to talk about women as victims of violence, and that's very true, but we have to remember that men are victims too, and they're victims because of their gender. So they have been attacked and targeted by all sides of the conflict. Boko Haram, when they came to communities, one of the things that they would do is go house to house and kill all the men and older boys. The military also, because of what I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to distinguish between who is the enemy and who is a civilian. There has been a tendency in various times in the history of the conflict for the military to go around communities who they see as all belonging to Boko Haram, engage in arbitrary arrest, also extrajudicial killings of men and boys. And at the same time, women and girls also suffer. Because many of the men have left to save themselves, they are missing, they're in detention, or they are fighting, women are the ones who are having to look after themselves, their children, their elders, find ways to negotiate with men with guns for their safety, find ways to IDP camps, and then have to support themselves and their families and their community. And the third thing that I want to mention is the role that gender plays in driving the conflict and violence. So we see, for example, that in the early days, when Muhammad Yusuf was preaching in Maiduguri, a lot of young men were attracted to him because he told them that unlike in mainstream society, where to be a man, to be seen as a man, you need to be able to have money, you need to be married, you need to be able to provide for your family. He arranged inexpensive marriages for his followers. He found another way to give young men status and relevance that wasn't reliant on money in a society where your ability to earn money often depends on your connections, and nepotism, corruption, inequality. We know that these are all problems with Nigeria. And also young women were drawn to Boko Haram because it offered them also a chance for relevance. So it offered them a chance for education, particularly religious education, that they were denied in society. It provided them with important roles to play within the group. And so, yeah, I mean, I think when someone comes to town and tells you that they're trying to change society for the better, and they're doing it in the name of God, and you can be part of that, many people I spoke to said, how could I refuse that? So I think if we really look at gender, I think one of the ways that what we need to do to move past the conflict is actually address the patriarchal social relations that were and still are one of the driving forces behind the conflict.
Absolutely. Chitra, it has been a pleasure not only to be in your presence and to have your wonderful book here, but really just to listen to the wonderful insight you have brought to what is an incredibly important topic and conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you
so much.